All right, so Red Like China is pretty awesome. He followed me, I followed him back. He seems like a pretty cool dude.
No one on earth has lived in Israel as long as we Jews have.
This is why I say that Israel and Zionism are not Jewish. They are completely and utterly secular. Whether you are Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, you can trace the beginnings of your religion back to Abraham. Abraham emigrated to what we now call Palestine from what we now call Iraq. He was an Arab. Abraham had a son named Isaac, who then had a son named Jacob. Jacob is who the 12 tribes of Israel are descended from. You cannot claim that the Jews were in Palestine before the Arabs when literally your own holy book tells you that you are descended from an Iraqi Arab man. Unless, of course, the holy teachings, the holy writings are not of much consequence to you, and really you're just interested in creating a white European nation state in the middle of the Arab world.
They are trying to create a white ethno state in the Middle East. That is literally true.
No one on earth has lived in Israel as long as we Jews have.
That is simply not true. Not according to documented history, but according to the actual religious texts of the Jewish people. The Jews themselves are descended from Abraham. Abraham emigrated to the Levant, or what we now call Palestine, from what we now call Iraq. And when he got there, the Canaanites were already settled there. To a large extent, the modern-day Palestinians are descended from those Phoenician tribes in the Levant. They were there before Abraham, and therefore they were there before the Jewish culture was even a thing, and they would remain there until the present day. And no, that does not mean that they are genetically identical. So if that's the game that these so-called Israelis want to play, then they have chosen a game where they are destined to lose. And that's beside the fact that this is all more or less irrelevant. The Palestinians exist, and they exist in Palestine, and they are being subject to brutal treatment by the Israelis, regardless of who was there first. But even according to the internal logic of Zionism itself, this analysis does not stand up to scrutiny.
No one on earth.
Okay, let's see what else he has.
All right, it's time for some self-criticism. I do this pretty regularly, but here we go again. I really need to stop engaging on the subject of what is Marxist communism. I spend a lot of time debunking the idea that it's, this moneyless, classless, stateless society, and the only reason I really do it is just because it's fun for me to just kind of like stunt on people and demonstrate my command of Marxism-Leninism, but it's really unhelpful, and it sort of misses the entire point, so I think this is something that I just need to move on from. Why do I say it misses the point? Because if you're going to ask the question, what is communism? I mean, communism is what it is. Communism is Leninism. Before Lenin did what he did, communism was just, at worst an idea, a word, and at best it was just, a cool, neat way that you could, see the unfolding of history, the movement of history, and understand it in a sublime and inherent way. But then Lenin saw that movement of history, and he actually inserted himself and the Bolshevik Party into history and started actively participating in it. The Bolshevik Revolution happened because Lenin and his comrades could see the writing on the wall, and they were ready to take advantage of the situation that Russia was in. So when we ask what is communism, communism is the USSR, it's the People's Republic of China, it's Vietnam, North Korea, Cuba. It is what it is in concrete reality. It isn't just an idea that we need to sit around.
Yo, Red Like China, you should talk about Cuba, please. I would love to hear your thoughts about Cuba, man. Alright, there goes Red Like China. That was cool. Leftist politics, imperialism, communism, and socialism. Let's see this.
Why do people on the left insist on making this point that productivity is not the point of humanity? I mean, I get that in capitalism, productivity means basically generating revenue for a capitalist, but in socialism, that's not the case. I mean, if we were to transition to a socialist society where the means of production are organized in such a way to uplift and enrich as many people as possible, in that scenario, if you aren't being productive, then what fucking use are you? And I understand the argument that, like, there are people with disabilities and such that can't contribute in the same ways that we can, but again, under a socialist framework, there's absolutely no reason that these people can't contribute. Maybe they can't work in capitalism because they're unable to generate the same amount of revenue that an able-bodied person would for a capitalist, but that doesn't mean they can't help somebody. I mean, disabled people have skills that they can share with people.
True.
They might be gifted speakers that would be able to uplift and inspire people. Hell, they might be able to do the same kind of work that any other person could, just not quite as efficiently. But
Facts.
as long as they're doing something, as long as they're contributing to the overall efforts of society, then that's being productive. Even if it just means, I don't know, you're cooking for your wife or taking care of your kids or, you know, organizing a soccer club at your school. It's definitely true that we need to sort of reevaluate what productivity means, but at the end of the day, humanity wants to be productive. We want to progress, we want to grow, and we want to prosper.
For real.
And that doesn't happen magically. That happens through hard work. Why do people on the left insist on making this point that productivity is not the point of humanity? I mean, I get that in capital...
Oh, this motherfucker. This guy's crazy, dude.
These animals, Hamas, savage, terrorists.
Hey, so what if a bunch of white people came from Europe and stole a bunch of brown people's land? I mean, that don't give them the right to resist the occupation. You know what I'm saying?
Hey.
These animals, Hamas.
That's good, bro. That's a good one.
Zionists will say that the saying from the river to the sea is a call for genocide, that it means the elimination of all Jewish people in Palestine. And that's really just projection, right? Like, they're saying that if they advocated for from the river to the sea, Israel will be free, that for them, that would mean the wholesale elimination of every single Arab in the area. They can't imagine the idea of a Jewish person living under an Arab or Muslim government. And that's because the Jewish Zionist government in Israel has no intention of ever respecting the human rights of Palestinians. Never mind the fact that Jewish people lived in Palestine under a Muslim government for a long time before Israel ever existed. Zionists will say that the saying...
Awesome.
I feel like a lot of people who follow me might not know what the March of Return was, but I just want to give a very, very brief overview of it before I start talking about the subject of this video. The March of Return took place in 2018, and essentially it was an overwhelmingly peaceful protest / demonstration in which many Palestinian people attempted to cross the border and reclaim their ancestral homes and homeland. And, of course, being the Zionist freaks that they are, Israel decided that they should open fire on a group of unarmed protesters. And, in fact, it was found that not only did they specifically target children, they also targeted the weak, the elderly, and the disabled. So this gets me into the actual topic of the video. There are a lot of claims going around that Hamas uses human shields. Now, first of all, let me tell you what their evidence for this is. Basically, they take an aerial photo.
Yo, where are you at, bro?
from
What
Gaza.
warehouse is this?
They have a building in the center of the image, and they take the red highlighter app on their photo editing software, and they color over the building and say, that means Hamas is in there. So beyond the fact that there's actually no evidence for this absurd claim, I just want to point out how it makes absolutely no sense. Because Israel has proven time and time again that not only are they willing to unalive civilians due to collateral damage, they are actually willing to directly target civilians, including children and other infirm people.
For real.
So if we know that human shields are not going to deter Israeli strikes, then what exactly would be the logic behind using human shields to begin with? I find this to be an example of the same
human
type
shields
of
aren't working, bro.
rhetoric that people use to basically discredit Hamas, and I find it to be somewhat racist. You can claim that they are a ruthless fighting force, which they definitely are. I mean, they're fighting to reclaim their homes from an occupying force, but by no means can you claim that they lack the analytical ability to recognize the fact that human shields will just not work against Israel.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people who follow me.
True.
First of all, the Zionists are backpedaling. They don't know what to do. They are just straight up grasping for straws. So on that note, keep up the good work, everybody. But I want to break down one of the arguments that they have started using that is just absolutely baffling to me. Basically, it's that all of the violence committed against Israel after the official founding of the state in 1948 is considered aggression, and that Israel is justified in their response. So basically, their argument is that if you just legitimate land theft with a piece of paper, then that means there's no longer any such thing as legitimate resistance to that land theft. A bunch of people from mostly white countries drew up a little document, and they gave some speeches, and they signed some names, and now the people of Palestine should just pack it in and accept the fact that their existence is now subject to Israeli approval. But here's the thing, though, that ignores, which is that someone's connection to the land that they live on and that their ancestors lived on before them is not just based on a piece of paper. The Palestinian people's connection to the land of Palestine is not just based on a UN resolution, it is based on centuries of history and their actual legitimate way of life. Zionists will claim that since 1948, Israel has been seeking peace, but if you steal someone's land and then you attempt to make peace without giving back the land, there is no universe in which that is a good faith attempt at peace. A lot of liberal commentators, such as the StarCraft streamer Destiny, have been talking about the amount of humanitarian aid going into Gaza.
Fuck Destiny.
They will use it as evidence that this humanitarian crisis is somehow self-imposed or that it's not really as bad as people say it is. But what this so-called analysis forgets is the fact that these conditions are conditions imposed by occupation, bombardment, and encirclement. Humanitarian aid is not going to solve this crisis. What will solve this crisis is a successful struggle for national liberation. For the TikTok censors, I am not advocating for violence against any person or any group of people. But that being said, when you are engaged in an armed, militant national liberation struggle, the type of aid that is needed is military aid. This crisis can only end when the Palestinian people are granted sovereignty over their land and the right to national self-determination, and that will only come through armed conflict. The Zionists and their benefactors in the West have made it abundantly clear that national self-determination is not something they are interested in granting to the Palestinians, and therefore the only way it will be achieved is by force. Long before 1920, following the First World War, when the British Mandate of Palestine was founded, that part of the world was already a place that Jewish people from Europe would go to find refuge from the anti-Semitism in Europe and elsewhere. This anti-Semitic Zionist idea that without the state of Israel, the persecuted Jews of Europe would have nowhere to go is just simply false. The part of Ottoman Syria that we now call Palestine was home to 20 or more Jewish settlements where the Jewish people there lived more or less in harmony with their Arab and Muslim counterparts. The Zionist project then is not actually about protecting European Jews. It's about setting up a client state in the Middle East that the West can use to wage a broader regional war against the Arab and Muslim world. There's a lot of great coverage on this app from comrades and even from people that I would basically consider liberals, but this is a point that I don't think gets enough attention, so I'm going to take it upon myself to keep hammering this point home and keep talking about it.
Good point.
My reach, my following is very limited, but I'm going to do what I can to stamp out these Zionist lies, specifically on this front. I think there's a misconception in the Western press and amongst the U.S. people that this conflict in Gaza is, Hamas on one side and the IDF on the other side. It's not quite that simple, and I want to break down something for you guys. The first thing is that there is the formal IDF, and then there's also armed militias on the Israeli side, which are essentially just like settlers who pick up a pew-pew and go and unalive Palestinians. So the idea that anyone who isn't an IDF soldier is somehow just like an unarmed civilian is just plainly and obviously not true. The other half of this is that while Hamas is more or less the figurehead of Palestinian resistance in Gaza, they are not the only group. The other two biggest groups are, of course, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Popular Resistance Committees, but there are other smaller groups as well. It's sort of like a broad coalition of, national liberation and resistance. So just to boil it all down to Hamas is a little bit reductive. And anyway, free Palestine, free Gaza, and down with the Zionist entity.
Hey.
Different than how the Nazis blamed Jews.
Can we stop pretending this has anything to do with Jews, at all? I mean, Israel is not a Jewish thing. Israel is a settler colonial project set up by the UK and America, countries which both have no regard for Jews, one way or the other. The question of Jewish identity or Jewish indigeneity has no bearing whatsoever on the question of whether or not European countries have the right to colonize and ethnically cleanse Arabs.
No different.
All right, that's pretty lit. What's this?
The U.S. underestimated the People's Army of Vietnam when they said that they would rather be unalived than allow a single U.S. soldier to continue occupying their land. They underestimated the Taliban when they said they would not allow their country to be ruled by a U.S. puppet state. And they underestimated the people of Iraq, who to this day say that the war is not over until every U.S. soldier leaves in a body bag or otherwise. How many times does this lesson need to be taught? Because it seems that from the U.S. State Department's perspective and from the perspective of their many shills online, these lessons have never been taught.
For real.
They are now underestimating Palestine and Hamas as well as their allies in Hezbollah, in Syria, and in Iran. The people of Central Asia will not submit to the colonization of their land by the West, by the North Atlantic. To the white Westerner living in the North Atlantic, it may seem feasible to dehumanize someone to the point that you can justify driving them off their land like cattle. But when you do that, you dehumanize yourself to the point that there is no reason not to fight back. And not just to fight back, but to fight back with the ruthlessness and brutality that we see now. As much as it may seem like it to us now and here, Palestine is not alone. Palestine will be free, and there's nothing that Israel or the U.S. and its allies can do about it.